As we're approaching, we're already engaged in getting artillery fire coming out at us. And as we get closer to the landing, you're getting mortar fire. And once you land, you're getting machine gun fire.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
I was born in Allentown on January 26, 1925. I had two brothers that were in the service prior to World War II. One was in the Navy and the other was in the Army. And after, when the war started, of course, I was the youngest out of both of them. And then I came along, and the war was on. I was in high school, and I was 16 years old when I heard they dropped the bomb at Pearl Harbor. And when I was 18, naturally I had to register for the draft. Well, 2 months later, I got notice from the draft board that I was classified 1A, which meant that most any day they'd call me. And I knew this. And I went immediately to the Navy recruiting and enlisted for 6 years to avoid being drafted in the Army or Marines. I wanted to be a Navy man. When you're first as a seaman and you go on board ship, you start out from the bottom as a recruit, and I was on the deck division. And there, they taught us everything about the Navy language, and it was altogether different. And you work your way up the ladder. And then I became a coxswain. That is the man that operates and is in charge of that boat. Anybody that is in charge of a small boat in the Navy is called a coxswain. I was sent to Evansville, Indiana to pick up our ship. And the ship was called LST 553. That meant Landing Ship Tank. And all amphibious ships at that time didn't have names. They only went by the numbers. And I boarded that ship then at Evansville, Indiana. It was built there right alongside the Ohio River. Well, when we boarded that ship, we noticed that the whole ship was camouflaged, tropical colors. Oh, about a day or two later, we got together with the crew members and said, boy, this ship is bound for the Pacific. We went on a large convoy. We passed the equator, went down to the Solomon Islands, and we trained there with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. They already had Guadalcanal was secured. We were there to be taught how to land, how to take care of their tanks, because that's what our ship was. Our ship was meant for 2 things. LST, Landing Ship Tank. It carried about 250 combat soldiers and 20 tanks. That's all that was for. Our ship carried 2 landing crafts, one the starboard side and one the port side. I was in charge of the port side. What happens is they lower the boat to the water and they tie it up, and the Marines or combat soldiers come down a cargo net into the boat. And once the boat is filled, we carry 35 combat soldiers in there, plus our 4 sailors. And then once they're all loaded, we go in a large circle until the first wave is all together. Until we all get, and then we'll all divide up and go into the wave, first wave, second wave, and third wave to invade an island. When we get there, our fleet is already there. I mean the fleet, the big battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. They are pounding that island with their big guns to soften up that island. As we arrive, our ship then unloads the troops, and into my landing craft. And like I said, we could get together and then we'll all go in. I went into the third wave. Now, as we're approaching, we're already engaged in getting artillery fire coming out at us. And as we get closer to the landing, you're getting mortar fire. And once you land, you're getting machine gun fire. Well, my boat, and we were instructed when we land, go full speed so that your boat digs into the sand, so that you don't broach the boat. Because if you broach the boat, went sideways, you're not going to get out of there. That's it. You're finished. Because the next wave will keep you. You can't get out because you're already, your propeller's in the sand. You know, you can't do moving. Well, after I hit that beach full speed, we lowered the front ramp, and the 35 Marines start storming up the beach. They're encountering machine gun fire and mortar fire. Plenty of them young guys got killed immediately, and a lot got wounded. That's part of the invasion. Now, when our big guns stop firing, that's when they invade. Now, they are being protected by our airplanes coming down and softening up them and bombing and strafing the Japanese to give them a little beach, advancement. Once the Marines advance, then our ship beaches. The ship opens its big bow doors, ramp comes down, and off roll the tanks to support the Marines that are making an advancement. That's what transpires in an invasion. Peleliu was surrounded by reefs, most of the island. When I had my boat loaded with combat Marines, I couldn't go over these reefs with the boat. So we transferred the troops into LVTs. LVTs is a landing vehicle track. That was a slow-moving amphibious. It could go in the water, it could climb over reefs, and also on land. LVTs. And that was the fiercest battle I was in. I was in the third wave, bringing in troops. In my 6 years of the landings, that was the worst. We were supposed to take that island within 3 days because the island was only 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. But why we wanted that island is because the Japanese had an airstrip on there. And that would help us from jumping to different islands and for our Air Force to get up closer. And that's why we invaded Peleliu. It's a small island. We were supposed to conquer that island in 3 days. It took us 24 days. Why? The Japanese were all hiding in tunnels throughout that whole island. And they only come out when it's an advantage to them. And that's how it took so long. We are then preparing for the next invasion. That was Leyte. That was my next one in the Philippines. Let me tell you this, the first thing we encountered when we invaded Leyte, the first time we experienced kamikaze pilots. They were there to dive on our ships, and they did. They did a good job. Our planes shot down 3 of them. They never hit us. They got close, but never hit us. We were lucky there. While this was going on, our fleet was battling the Japanese fleet in Surigao, San Benito Straits in the Gulf. That lasted for 2 days, or maybe a little longer, I'm not sure. Because they were quite a few distance away from us. Because our fleet intercepted that fleet before it came through to Leyte. Had that ships come through, and we only had anti-aircraft guns, they had these big guns, they would have crushed us. Never happened, because our ship intercepted their ships. And that sea battle, we came out as victors. Their fleet after that was decimated. I don't know how many ships they sunk, but a lot of ships they fled. A lot of Japanese fled away then because they know they were losing the battle. But from there on in, their fleet was nothing, really. Wow. And well, they finally conquered Leyte, like I said, in 24 days. Now we left. We regrouped for our next one. Our next landing was Mindoro in the Philippines. That wasn't that severe. That was pretty easy. Then we went to Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines. And the fourth one was at Subic Bay in the island of Luzon. That was the 4 landings we made in the Philippines. After that, we went back to Peleliu, and we got together and loaded our ship up again to our next invasion. They never told us in advance where we're going until we're way out at sea, and then they let us know. Now we're on our way to invade Okinawa. We invaded Okinawa on Easter Sunday morning, April the 1st, 1945. That was the biggest battle in the Pacific, biggest invasion. That island was 73 miles long and about 8 miles wide. It was 300 miles, I believe, about west of Japan. Very close. The Japanese really knew that that would be their biggest battle, the last one. They knew that. Well, after I landed the troops, I was in the first wave. Guess what? Not anything come on us, any firepower. As we were approaching it, no artillery, no mortar fire, no machine gun fire. They let all our troops land. All these different waves. And we wondered, what strategy is this? We never experienced anything like this. Guess what? They all were hidden underground in their tunnels. Like I said, 73 miles. They had tunnels throughout that whole island. After our troops landed, the very next day, all hell broke loose. They come out of the tunnels. Well, our Marines that I landed, there was 2 beaches. White Beach number 1, White Beach number 2. I landed at White Beach number 2. Not, like I said, no firepower, nothing. Our troops that I landed were Marines, and they secured the northern part of that very quickly. And they start going south, pushing themselves, advancing. While they were advancing, we heard, and our admirals and our generals heard that a lot of Okinawa civilians were getting killed by crossfire. Then we were dispatched, our ship was dispatched an order to go down to the southern islands, the southern end of the island, to evacuate a lot of civilians. Well, our skipper beached the ship, and we loaded the whole, our tanks were already off. We loaded that whole tank deck with civilians, women, children, older men. We must have carried 1,000 of them in there. They didn't have no time to sit, they had to stand. We then transported them all the way up the northern end and left them all, because that was in the Marines' hands already, or the soldiers and Marines, a combination of both. And that's when we left them off. The rumor was there, not only the rumor, it's actual. The Japanese told a lot of civilians that we were monsters, we were going to rape their women, that they should commit suicide. And they did. A lot of those women and children jumped off their cliffs and killed themselves. In fact, some of the Japanese gave them hand grenades to kill themselves. All a bunch of rumors, lies. Well, it took us close to 3 months to conquer that island. That was the biggest and fiercest battle in the Pacific. The Navy took a beating there. About 5,000 sailors were killed from kamikaze planes. And for another 5,000 were wounded. That's just the Navy. Now, the Army and Marines, they lost a lot too. I don't know what the figure was there. But the battle had ended, and then we went back to the Philippines, to Buckner Bay. While we were at Buckner Bay or on our way, we found out that our Air Force dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The Japanese didn't surrender then. And you know, it killed close to 70,000 of their civilians. So they dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. Killed the same amount of people. The Japanese finally then surrendered on August 14. They had enough. We were so happy. Now we said to ourselves, my God, you know, tomorrow we ain't going to go in a battle. We're going to be sent home. We're going to probably see our sweetheart girlfriends, get married, you know, and enjoy life. That was in my mind. And we were also happy. There was a lot sent home right away. Those that were drafted, a lot of military, they didn't need any military anymore, right? But I still had 2.5 years remaining on my 6-year enlistment. I stayed on that ship. That ship then was ordered to sweep pressure mines in Japan so our ships could use that going into their harbors. Pressure mines were dropped by our airplanes in the harbors to stop their shipping going in and out. Now they call it pressure mines for one reason. When a ship, the pressure mines that would drop will sink to the bottom. They lay there. They're not these floating mines. They're laying at the bottom. As soon as the ship gets directly over that bomb, it explodes. Now, the war was over. 28 of us volunteered for that duty. The war's over. Who the heck at 18 stupid would volunteer? The war's over, and we didn't get killed during the war. Now we're hanging out there, and our lives are on the line, and we did that for 60 days. And in order to, we call them sweeping. Sweeping was When our ship, every 100 yards, went back and forth 6 times to cover that whole harbor, to detect if there's a live mine, and it would explode. We never encountered any, to our blessing. Now, we wondered why. Well, they might have exploded before, or maybe seawater made them inoperable. I don't know. We never found out. But we were happy we never hit one. That's why I'm here today.
Yes, sir.
And now that was over. The next duty we had was to disarm the Japanese on a few islands in around Okinawa. That's where I got the samurai sword, and I'll tell you how that happened. They knew that we were coming there to disarm them because the war was over, and they knew it ahead of time. Well, I was on a land party with them to disarm them. I went ashore with them, and we instructed them to bring all their guns, ammunition, explosives down to the beach. They did. While I was there, we had them load their guns and ammunition on their big wooden boats. 4 of the Japanese soldiers were on there with my crew, and I piloted that boat out to sea 4 or 5 miles and had these Japanese throw all this stuff into the water while I was still traveling. I didn't just sit there, disperse everything. On the way back, I made a couple trips. On the way back on one of my trips, I happened to see this Japanese soldier come down the road with 4 other Japanese. And he was wearing a samurai sword. And since we were there to disarm him, I quickly went over to him and I said in English, "Sir, you won't need this anymore." And I unbuckled it from his belt. And I brought it home.